One last time for 2025, good people of the Grove. All right, if you know me well enough, then you know it's probably not the last time, but it is the last time for growth groups. At least this video is going to be the last video for growth groups for the year. And we have completed our journey through 1st and 2nd Samuel in the year. And wow, what a journey it's been. It's been 21 videos now that we've gone through for these two books. And here we are, their culmination. And like we did on Sunday with Nehemiah, so do we now close out this book in 2nd Samuel. And it ends in a similar way, a little bit like a thud. But I do think there is some good news, just as there was some good news for us at the end of Nehemiah. Some really beautiful things as we look at these last two chapters, 2 Samuel 23 and 24. Let's get right to it. So here we are. We've got just two big chapters here, two summary statements ultimately, and one big problem in chapter 24. So first, what happened in chapter 23? Really, this David last words, and he does a couple of the different things. He makes sure that he knows, or that we know, what his final words were. And then he names, ultimately, names and numbers his mighty men, who, if you look at what makes them mighty, it is that they do some pretty significant things militarily. But if you look at some themes throughout chapter 23, as he's starting to name his mighty men and number them, it is that they are loyal to him. When everyone else flees, these men stay. When he needs things, these men deliver, and that's what makes them mighty in his eyes. I think it's really important that we understand that. It's not just they're mighty warriors, that's true. They had character, not just strength in physique, but strength in integrity, and I think that's really beautiful. So David's life is coming to a close, and his last words are recorded along with the naming and numbering of his mighty men in chapter 23. In chapter 24, boy, do we have some problems. Well, the main problem there, let me just summarize it first. First, David, it says, is incited by the Lord in 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 1. If you look at the parallel passage in 1 Chronicles chapter 21, I encourage everyone to do this that's taking this chapter seriously. Go read 1 Chronicles 21 and 22, and you'll find that the parallel passage gives a little bit of a different perspective. In 2 Samuel, it says David was incited by the Lord. He became angry with Israel for some reason we don't know, and he incited David to go and take a census. In 1 Chronicles 21, we find that David was incited by Satan. So in one perspective, the Lord is inciting David. In another perspective, it is Satan that is inciting David. What do we do? Many people will say, well, it's a contradiction. There it is right there. What do we do with this? How do we synthesize these two realities, that God is inciting him and yet also Satan is inciting him? We've got to work through that. Here's my synthesis. Ultimately, it's both. It's not the Lord or Satan. It's both the Lord and Satan. Not that they're one and the same, but that the Lord uses Satan's inciting of David to accomplish his ultimate will, to take the census, and David does so foolishly. He repents, and God works out his sovereign plan and reign and rule, even though Satan is at work here. Look, this makes sense for us. It should, at least our experience should help us understand this. There are things in our life that happen because Satan comes against us, and yet we know that nothing happens outside of the word and will and way of our God. This is ultimately Romans 8:28. For God works out everything for the purpose of those who love him. He is in fact incited by Satan, but he is also incited under the sovereign will of our Lord to take a census. And what it does is it reveals in chapter 24, it reveals that David is trusting in people rather than the Lord himself. Again, we go on past that apparent contradiction, though I would tell you it's not a contradiction. You can make sense of it, as I just have. We go past that first verse and into the rest of the chapter of 24. And again, we're just summarizing so far. Upon repentance, God gives David three choices to choose from in his punishment. We have 3 years of famine, 3 months of being pursued by your enemies, your foes, or 3 days of pestilence and sickness. David wisely chooses 3 days of pestilence, as he sees that as being in the hands of the Lord, and he would rather be in the hands of the Lord than in the hands of people. Now, this is saying here. Look, I'll get to this in just a moment, but I want to just point it out to you as we get through this. David is using the census as a means to gain confidence in war. He gets 1.3 million men who are ready for war. What the census will reveal is that he is putting his trust in humans instead of his trust in God himself. But when it comes to choosing the punishment that God has for him, he puts his money where his mouth is. He repents of his foolishness, and now he puts his money where his mouth is, and he says, I would rather put my trust in you, Lord. I want my trust to be in you. Yes, I put my trust in humans, but now I'm not trusting in anything else besides in you. So do with me what you will for these 3 days of sickness. I put my trust in you. And it is a beautiful picture of what true repentance is, not just confessing it with our mouth, but a change in our heart. And indeed, David does that. He does not put his trust in the number of warriors anymore. Now he puts his trust in the Lord, who wipes out 70,000 people, oddly enough. David loves the numbers, but God takes away many numbers. So don't skip past also the threshing floor incident. It is not a footnote. What we will find again in the parallel passage of 1 Chronicles 21 and 22 is that God uses this, and David purchases the threshing floor, and God uses this exact place to be the place where God will build his temple through Solomon. It's not a footnote if you keep reading, particularly go read the parallel passage in 1 Chronicles. Okay, now we get to the questions, right? What does it say about God? What does it reveal about me? And what must I do as a result? Well, what does it reveal about God? Chapter 23, God is named as a couple of different things here. As the God of Israel, he's personal. He is also the God of the rock of Israel. He's not just personal, he's their place of refuge, their place of strength, the place of their foundation. It's important that we understand that that is true of us as well, that Jesus is our rock, ultimately. And so he is also a God who speaks in verses 1 through 3 of chapter 23. And the summary of David's life is that God is with him, and God is a covenant-keeping God. He is with David, and he is committed to be with David and with Israel no matter what. That's what verse 5 would say. And therefore, David's house stands with God. You see, David commits to be with God in his last words. That's the summary of his life. We are with God. We are his people because he has committed to be with us. And what good news that is, that he commits to be with us even when we do things like do a census. Chapter 23 reveals about us, ultimately, that we are remade when God commits to us. When God commits to be his people and he forms his relationship with us through a covenant, it remakes us for who we are. Now we are no longer choosing other gods, serving other gods. Instead, we are being guided by a God who speaks to us and commits to be with us. This is huge, especially when you start to compare how God works. He speaks to us, as opposed to how every other God in all of history has spoken. It doesn't. They don't speak. Our God is the only one that is alive. Our God is the only one who has a voice. Our God is the only one who speaks to us. Our God is the only one who makes covenants with his people. So understand, it reveals a great bit about who God is, but also we are his people. It remakes us when he commits to us. What must I do as a result of chapter 23? Well, I would ask you this. Are you numbered and named amongst David? Are you part of his people? And his mighty men? Are you loyal? Do you have the character of who God calls to be mighty in this chapter? Throughout the story of David, David wants 2 things to be known. He is with God because God is with him. That's the first part of 23. And then the second part of 23 is that ultimately there is a loyalty that comes, and that's what really being mighty is all about. So are you the kind of person that would be seen as mighty, as loyal. When everyone else deserts the Lord, when everything else gets difficult, do you remain loyal to God and his people and his purposes on the earth? Great question to form an I will statement. So therefore, what must you do to be loyal, to be the kind of person that is perseverant and is mighty, just as David's mighty men were? All right, now here's where we're going to get to the real stuff. Chapter 24, there's much more to be said than what I can say, but I want to get to it. Chapter 24, what does it reveal about God? Well, God works all things together for those who love him. That's in Romans 8. We know that. But it's also right here and demonstrated here as God uses evil to accomplish his ultimate plan. He works out every little bit of our lives, even the hard parts, even the parts where we're tempted somewhat to sin. Doesn't mean God tempts us. He does not. Remember, Satan is playing a role here, and God oversees all of it. So we have to understand that God at least remains one or two layers away from the actual temptation that is coming against us. Satan is the author of that. But it reveals that God is working out an ultimate plan. You can see this in Genesis 50:20, where the brothers who have sold Joseph into slavery, God uses for good. We can see it in Romans 8, as I've already quoted. Now we see it here in chapter 24, verse 1. So look, not only does God show that he oversees every little bit of our lives, but he knows the end from the beginning. If there is no plague, there is no punishment. If there is no punishment, there is no threshing floor. If there is no threshing floor, there is no purchased point in Israel where God will put the foundation for the sacrifice of all of God's people at the temple. It is here that God ultimately starts to stake his claim for not just the people of Israel to dwell, but for him to dwell. And that's what you see in the parallel passage. God accepts this sacrifice and intends to dwell by his fire, which again, if you go back all throughout history, that's how God dwells with his people. It is with fire. And he does that in the parallel passage as a preview of what he'll do with the temple as Solomon finishes it in 1st and 2nd Kings. So really beautiful, really big ideas, really difficult ideas. What does this reveal about us in chapter 24? Well, I think what chapter 24 reveals is that we trust in what we can measure rather than in God's character and posture towards his people. There's a Psalm 20, verse 7 says this: "Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God." David trusted 1.3 million men to fight for him instead of trusting in the Lord here at the end of his life. He has seen God deliver him, and yet in moments of weaknesses, he runs after security and certainty in humanity rather than, because he can see it, rather than depending and continuing to depend on the Lord as God disciplines him for, and he certainly fortifies him to do into the future. All right, what must I do as a result? Well, I think there's some really beautiful things in all this in chapter 24. But I think, just I'll give you a bonus here, but the first one that I'll give you here is, where do you trust in what you can measure, in what you can count, in what you can see, rather than putting your trust in the Lord? Where are you putting your trust in your what you can see and what you can do? Why do you, as Joab said to David, right? What we see right here in 2 Timothy, why does my or 2 Timothy, 2 Samuel, verse 3, why does my Lord the king delight in this? Do you delight in things that you can see and measure and can control, or do you put yourself in the hands of Christ your King, as David eventually does in verse 14? Let us fall into the hands of the Lord, for his mercy is great, but let me not fall into the hands of men, even yourself. That's the beauty of 2 Samuel chapter 24. But I got a little bonus here, a little bonus tip for parenting. Everybody that is parenting, if your kids are little, if your kids are grown, here is a bonus for, well, maybe not grown, but certainly teenage. Bonus for parenting. I love to use what God used for David here as an option on how to discipline. You'll notice that God gives David three choices, right? In chapter 24, ultimately verses 12 through 14, really 13 and 14. Do you want to have 3 years of famine come onto your land? Do you want to have 3 months where you're fleeing from your enemies, or will you have 3 days of a disease, of sickness, of pestilence? Consider, decide. I like to parent this way when my kids are ultimately being stubborn, where multiple times have I warned them, where multiple times have I given them an easy discipline. And now it's just, you got to get creative. Nothing's working, right? This is one of my favorite ways to discipline my kids. I will give them a choice. Do you want 3 weeks of going nowhere? Do you want 2 weeks of no screens? Or do you want 1 week of all the above? Pick your poison. You're going to get disciplined. Which one do you want? For me, I like it because it takes the pressure off of getting the discipline just right, and it allows them to own what it is that they want to be punished with. So that's it. We're done with 1st and 2nd Samuel. And as I said at the beginning, it kind of ends with a thud, right? That all of a sudden the plague was averted from Israel, but don't miss the gospel. Don't miss it. Let this be the thing that we end growth groups with, right? The end of our journey of 1st and 2nd Samuel comes, but don't miss the gospel. The sacrifice is made on the threshing floor, on the altar, and God accepts that sacrifice, and the plague is averted from Israel. Fast forward, and a sacrifice is also made for us on an altar of wood called the cross, and the plague of sin and death is averted for God's people through Jesus' sacrifice on our behalf. At the very place that the temple was, man, Jesus gets kicked out of that place, gets kicked out of the city, and yet God makes good on the promise to forgive sins, as he has been promising all throughout, that though our sin ultimately, he cannot and will not tolerate it, every sin demands a sacrifice. There is no such thing as free sin. Every sin demands a sacrifice. And just as it was for them, so is it for us. That Jesus, that altar was bought for 60 shekels. Jesus was bought for 30 shekels. And he made peace for us on the cross. Look at what it says, that they made a peace offering there at that altar. Jesus himself is our peace. What a beautiful picture of the gospel right there at the end of this journey and 2 Samuel. Hope this is helpful. Love ya. See you soon.